Boa tarde a todas e todos. Estamos muito felizes e honrados em receber a oportunidade de lançar este livro tão importante e tão novo em muitas de suas teses, tanto por seu conteúdo quanto por quem é que diz esse conteúdo. Essas, talvez, na minha humilde opinião, sejam as duas luzes principais deste evento. Que é o que disse esse livro e quem é que eu disse, por que eu disse, por que agora e como eu disse. Mas vamos começar pelo começo. Em nome da Congregação Israelita Paulista, o Stand With Us e a editora Contexto, temos o prazer de dar as boas-vindas a todas as pessoas que estão conosco nesta tarde. Finalmente, gostaria de agradecer aos organizadores deste evento. É uma iniciativa pessoal do nosso presidente, Mário Fleck, e no nome dele, agradecemos a toda a equipe da CIP e, de algum modo, a toda a equipe profissional e a toda a equipe voluntária e, de algum modo, a todos os associados e mantenedores que permitem que todas as atividades aconteçam. Queremos agradecer a André Last e, em nome dele, a toda a equipe de Stand With Us por suas boas e importantíssimas iniciativas. Agradecer a Daniel Pinsky, em nome de quem agradecemos a toda a equipe da editora Contexto, que trouxe e permitiu esse livro ser traduzido ao português e oferecido ao nosso público. Agradecemos também à equipe de tradução simultânea, Jaqueline Moreno, Ayala Bandi, Ana Ruth Kleinberger, e as intérpretes em Libras, Rosi Santos e Nara Oliveira. O áudio original está sendo transmitido apenas nos canais da CIP. O evento em português está sendo transmitido nos canais das três organizadoras. O QR Code na tela para o site da editora Contexto é que oferece até dia 3 de outubro 30% de desconto na compra do livro. Basta apontar o celular para o QR Code ou entrar no link que está na descrição. Na descrição ainda tem um formulário para que todos recebam, sem nenhum custo, os autógrafos eletrônicos dos autores. Este evento, em particular, é parte da estratégia da Academia CIP de Cultura e Estudos Judaicos, que aos poucos está começando a caminhar, por enquanto timidamente, mas em breve haverá um lançamento mais robusto, com uma grade de atividades de diversos tipos. E a proposta principal é criar uma ponte entre as novidades que acontecem nos laboratórios dos especialistas, sejam eles jornalistas, acadêmicos, escritores, artistas e o público em geral. Tudo que tenha a ver com interesses judaicos, com temas de interesse judaico. Esse livro, como falei, tem uma grande tese, uma novidade na forma de ver o conflito e nas soluções que se propõem. E essa é a grande contribuição, vale muito a pena lê-lo, e por isso temos a honra de poder contar com uma das autoras, Einat Wilf, que junto com Adi Schwartz, ambos acadêmicos e jornalistas de prestígio internacional, escreveram esse livro e agora ele sai à luz em português. Vamos ouvir do André alguns traços da carreira da Einat e em seguida poderemos conversar com ela também. Sejam todas e todos muito bem-vindos.
Boa tarde a todos. Obrigado, Rabino Reuven, pela introdução, pelas palavras. Agradecemos também ao Mário Fleck, membro, além de presidente da CIP, membro do Conselho da Stand With Us, pela iniciativa de traduzir o livro, que contou com a participação nossa também. Quero agradecer também aos voluntários, aos profissionais da CIP, da Congregação Israelita do Brasil, São Paulo, desculpe, a Livraria Contexto, a Editora Contexto e a todos os profissionais da Stand With Us trabalhando nesse domingo. O tema, a guerra do retorno, o tema do retorno dos refugiados faz parte na academia que se estuda a respeito do conflito palestino-israelense, onde eu também me formei, num dos 4 pilares do que se acredita ser os 4 pilares do processo de paz entre israelenses e palestinos. E o que o livro traz para nós é que o tema dos refugiados, que seria um dos 4 temas, não é apenas um dos 4 temas, mas é o tema mais importante dos 4 temas. É um dos principais temas que existiram até então, negações de aceitar Israel em determinados momentos da história, e por isso nada melhor do que a Einat e o Adi. O Adi, infelizmente, não pôde comparecer, está em um local com a internet extremamente problemática em Israel, e por isso a gente vai contar com a ilustre presença da Einat. A Einat, ela é doutora em Ciências Políticas pela Universidade de Cambridge, foi membro do Parlamento israelense entre 2010 e 2013 pelo Partido Trabalhista e publicou outros 6 livros abordando questões centrais sobre a sociedade israelense. Nesse primeiro momento da conversa, sem mais delongas, eu vou deixar aqui a Einat introduzir a sua obra e o tema que a levou a escrever essa obra fantástica. Eu recomendo a todos vocês que comprem o livro é uma delícia de ler, ela tem uma escrita leve, tranquila, viciante e extremamente interessante. Einat, bem-vinda. Por favor, dê algumas palavras a nós aqui de introdução a respeito da sua obra, do livro e desse tema tão importante para nós.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. Sorry, I'm just hearing another voice in the background. So thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. And thank you for so kindly bringing the book to the Portuguese-speaking world. I sincerely hope to be able to come in person soon enough to Brazil and to speak to you directly about the book. So generally, when people speak about the Arab-Israeli or Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the things you hear about that matter to the conflict are issues about territory and settlements and occupation and Jerusalem. And we are told that those are the key issues that are needed to resolve or understand in order to know what the conflict is about. You rarely hear about the issue of the refugees, the Palestinian refugees, their demand for what they call the right of return. And if you do hear about it, it's generally presented as something not very important. What we make, Adi and I, the case that we make in the book, is not only is this the most important issue, is that this is the issue that once you understand it, you understand the conflict. You understand what the conflict is about, and you understand what is required in order to resolve it and bring about peace. And of course, the way that we got to it is that we were also, both Adi and I, Adi used to work at Haaretz, and I worked with peacemakers such as Yossi Beilin and Shimon Peres. I was a member of the Labor Party. I worked with Ehud Barak. I was always a supporter of a two-state solution to the conflict, Israel and Palestine, opposing settlements, wanting to end the occupation. And I supported all Israeli governments that made an effort, such as Rabin's government in the 90s, and later Ehud Barak's government in 2000. And like many Israelis of the left who supported a two-state solution, we realized a very interesting phenomenon. Despite what we were told, that the Palestinians want to end the conflict by establishing a state in the West Bank and Gaza with a capital in East Jerusalem, whenever they faced the opportunity to do so, most prominently in 2000, but also in 2008, they didn't take it. And this didn't make sense to us. If a people want a state, why do they not say yes when they can have a state? And During that time, I had a lot of meetings with young Palestinians. If you recall, not only did the Palestinians walk away from the opportunity to have a state and to make peace, what followed was terrible violence, the blowing up of buses all across Israel, people in cafes were massacred, entire families, children, and people began to ask, if the Palestinians don't want a state in the West Bank and Gaza, what do they want? Because they could have had that, they didn't take it, so what do they want? A very simple question. And in speaking with Palestinians, I listened to them and I realized that the answer was staring us in the face all along. What they wanted, what they still want, is what they always say they want. From the river, the Jordan River, to the sea, to the Mediterranean Sea. They want all of it. They want the whole territory from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, including the state of Israel. They don't want a state, a Palestinian state next to the state of Israel. They want a Palestinian state instead of the state of Israel. And the way that this dream, this demand, this goal is manifested is in what the Palestinians call the right of return, which, as we show in the book, is neither a right nor a return. The Palestinians claim that millions of Palestinians, the lowest number is 5.5 million, normally they even say 7 or 8 million, they claim that millions of Palestinians have the right, which they don't, but they believe that they have the right to settle inside Israel, not in the West Bank and Gaza, inside Israel in the name of what they call return. Now, the numbers are such that if the millions of Palestinians exercise this so-called right, Israel becomes an Arab Palestinian state with a Jewish minority. So when Palestinian leaders, such as Abu Mazen, say that they want peace, that they want a two-state solution, the two-state solution that they envision is one Arab Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, and another Arab Palestinian state to replace Israel. Until today, there has not been any Palestinian leader, and not even any Palestinian journalist, who clearly believed in a peace based on two states, one Arab, one Jewish. The idea that they will share the land with a state where one of the states is the sovereign state of the Jewish people, till today, remains unacceptable to the Palestinians. And their demand to return reflects it. The problem with the West, of course, and much of the world, is much of the world thinks the Palestinians are not serious about it. What we show in the book is that they are very serious about it. They are so serious that it is more important to them than having a state. So the priorities of the Palestinian people is from the river to the sea. The priority is return. If they can have a Palestinian state in part of the land, but it means forgoing return, it means that they have to finally accept that the other part of the land will belong to the Jewish people. This is not what they want. So I will end this opening just by saying I am a great admirer of Israel's former foreign minister and great ambassador to the United Nations and US, Abba Eban. He famously said that the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. But I've come to realize, working on the book, is that they never missed an opportunity, because what we think of as opportunities, they don't consider opportunities. Establishing a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza without settlements, with a capital in East Jerusalem, that's not an opportunity. It's not what they want. So as far as they're concerned, they never missed an opportunity. because what they're fighting for, which is from the river to the sea, is the thing that they're trying to achieve. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, Inat, por essa abertura fortíssima. Você, então, está nos dizendo, em poucas palavras, vamos ver se eu entendi, que, de algum modo, não existe o pensamento paralelo ao pensamento da esquerda israelense entre os palestinos. E vamos fazer um pouquinho de história. Lá atrás, antes de tudo isto, digamos, as pessoas não especialistas no conflito acreditam, na sua maioria, que se trata de dois povos, que cada um tem sua narrativa e cada um acredita que essa terra é deles. Dentro desses dois povos existem os maximistas, digamos, ou os que maximizam, digamos, que vão dizer eu quero tudo, e os mais pragmáticos que vão dizer eu quero tudo, mas vou ceder uma parte porque tem um outro que também quer tudo. Você está nos dizendo que, de fato, durante muito tempo, muitas pessoas dentro do povo judeu também diziam, se abre o Tanakh, encontra que essa é toda a nossa terra, Síria e Jordânia também, mas não vamos reclamar nem Síria, nem Jordânia, de jeito nenhum, nem toda a parte de Israel. E quando veio a partição, inclusive os judeus da direita celebraram a partição, no 29 de novembro do ano 47. Os palestinos não a celebraram. Você está nos dizendo que essa postura de eu quero tudo e por isso não celebro nada até não ter tudo, se perpetua em todos. Não existe uma esquerda palestina pragmática que diga eu quero tudo, acho que mereço tudo. Mas vou ser pragmático, vou ficar com uma parte e deixar existir o outro. É isso mesmo? No 29 de novembro.
Okay. So you're absolutely right that the solution is simple. We have two peoples on the land, the Jewish people, the Arab Palestinians. They both have a connection to the land, each from their own perspective. Neither one can have all of it, and therefore each side will have some of it. This was the logic behind all the peace agreements. This was the logic, as you mentioned, behind the United Nations Partition Plan of 1947. So you're right that this is the governing idea of how to resolve the conflict, and this is very much what I would like to see one day. But here is where we have a division in terms of the symmetry. From the Arab-Palestinian perspective, the Jewish claim to the land is illegitimate in any borders, not even a little bit. As far as they're concerned, the Jews are foreigners. They call us colonialists, they call us crusaders, they compared us recently to the Americans in Afghanistan. As far as they're concerned, we are foreigners. And because we're foreigners, we're also temporary, which means with enough time, we will disappear, just like the British, just like the French in Algeria, just like the Americans in Afghanistan, and of course, just like the Crusaders. So as far as they're concerned, their overall mission is to throw out the invading foreigners. They do not accept any notion that the Jews have a historic connection to the land. This is why you see them promoting in the UN and other bodies the idea that the Jews have no connection to the land, no connection to Jerusalem. The Jews, from the beginning, recognized that there are Arabs living there. Ever since the conquest of the Arab world of the Middle East in the 7th century, the people who live in the land have become Arabs and Muslims. The Jews recognized it, which is why from the beginning, the Jews supported ideas of partition. Initially, the partition with Jordan, later the partition of 1947, because as much as the Jews recognized that they have a connection to all of the land. They have connection to land which is now in Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Egypt. But the Jews, and especially the Zionist movement, has always been very pragmatic, saying, look, we would love to have all of it, but we understand that there are other people here, so let's share. So the Zionist movement has always been willing to share, not because it was happy about it, just because it was pragmatic. The Arab side, and especially the Arab Palestinian side, was never willing to share, because in their perspective, the Jews are foreigners who should go, not people with whom you share. They're people that you should push out, not people that you should live with and divide the land. So this is why there's no symmetry. Yes, on the Israeli side, you are right. There are people who want all of it. But at the end of the day, they are a tiny, tiny minority. The number of Israeli Jews who, if tomorrow there's a Palestinian leader and people who will come to the Jewish people in Israel and will say, look, we're done. The conflict is over. We understand that you too have a historical connection to this land. We recognize it, we accept it, but you can't have all of it. We can't have all of it. We're not going to demand return. You cannot settle everywhere that was mentioned in the Bible. Let's figure out how we divide the land between the two of us. If a Palestinian leader and people will say that to the Israeli Jews, the number of Israeli Jews who will say, absolutely not, we don't care, we should still control all of the West Bank, is minuscule, and they will be easily overturned by the vast majority of Israelis who always care far more about having a state for the Jews than in controlling each and every square centimeter that was ever mentioned in the Bible. And this is what is needed to end the conflict. The conflict basically ends very simply in one of two ways. One way is the Arab-Palestinian vision. The Jews leave. If the Jews leave or the Jews agree to be a religious minority in an Arab state, the conflict ends from the Arab-Palestinian perspective. The other way that the conflict ends, which is my preference, is that the Arab, and especially the Arab Palestinians, finally accept that the Jewish people have a legitimate right to self-determination in part of the land, and they open negotiations with us on how to divide the land, and they stop trying to control all of it.
Quando a gente está falando sobre o reconhecimento da legitimidade das aspirações políticas nacionais do povo judeu, que é justamente o que me leva à minha pergunta a você. Seria um problema de ordem conceitual mais do que um problema de ordem prática? A gente tem como afirmar que a rejeição a Israel é uma questão conceitual?
It actually, this is the issue itself. There's no way to play with it. If you look at the various ways that Palestinian leaders have tried to go around it, and we talk about it in the book, they will talk about the legitimacy of Israel, they will talk about the existence of Israel, they will talk about a two-state solution, but where will they stop? At anything that talks about the right of the Jewish people to self-determination. Because, for example, when they say, okay, Israel is legitimate or we support a two-state solution, and they still demand what they call the right of return, then they're not recognizing the right of the Jewish people to self-government. They're basically saying, yeah, we want a state for ourselves, and your state is legitimate, but we want to make it an Arab state. So that's not really what the Jewish side envisions. The Jewish side wants to live in a state where ultimately we govern ourselves. That's the purpose. If we don't have that, then we're not interested. The whole idea of Israel was to be the one state in the world where the Jewish people have self-governance. It's not only for the Jewish people, but it definitely has to be a state that is by and for the Jewish people. And this is something that the Palestinians fundamentally still reject. They reject every part of it. They reject the idea that the Jewish people are a people. You will often hear Palestinian leaders say things like, we respect those of the Jewish faith. We have nothing against religious Jews. So this is a conception that says, as long as Jews agree to think of their Jewish identity as a religion, that's not a problem, because they can be a Jewish religious minority in an Arab country. That's fine. So they always make the point of differentiating between Judaism as a faith or a religion and Judaism as a people and a nation. They completely reject the idea that the Jews are a people and a nation. You will hear it again and again. They reject the idea that the Jewish people have any connection whatsoever to the land of Israel. The Jews are presented as complete and utter foreigners, colonialists who came to a land to which they have no connection. So if the Jews are not a people and they're not a nation, then they don't have the right to govern themselves, like the Slovaks or Slovenians, for that matter. And if they don't have a connection to the land of Israel, then they certainly do not have the right to govern themselves in that land. This is the fundamental issue. It's not just a matter of language. It's not a matter of finding a way for them to say it. When they say it, the day they will say it is also the day they will mean it, which is why you mentioned Shimon Peres. I worked for him for a few years. Shimon Peres was known for his notion of constructive ambiguity, which means if we want to make peace, let's not say things clearly. Let's make things ambiguous. But what we discovered is that this ambiguity has been destructive, not constructive, because each side understood it differently. Israelis thought that there was peace, and Palestinians continued to believe in the right of return and from the river to the sea. So I've become the exact opposite in terms of my vision for peace. We need constructive specificity. Things need to be said clearly and specifically. And what needs to be said clearly, more than anything, by the Palestinian people and leadership is, we recognize the right of the Jewish people as a people and a nation to self-determination in the land of Israel. We recognize a right, it's a legitimate right. We have a right to self-determination too. And therefore, let's see how we divide the land so that both peoples can live side by side. The day that we will hear that, Palestinian leadership, is the day we will have peace.
Ou seja, Einat, e o livro diz isso em diversos lugares e de diversas formas. Aliás, concordo muito com o André, um livro que está escrito de um modo super leve, super direto, se lê com muita facilidade. Então, você, Einat, está dizendo que não vai adiantar continuar buscando soluções práticas, políticas, de segurança, de dinheiro, de territórios, até que o lado conceitual não esteja resolvido. E se é isso, essa é a primeira parte da pergunta minha que vem agora. Se é isso, qual é o modo? Porque então, você que é uma especialista em política internacional, me parece, e talvez aqui esteja falando muito forte o rabino, o educador, o filósofo do diálogo, mas me parece que você está falando em educação, está falando filosofia, não está falando mais política. Como é que se muda se é um problema de conceito, de como um povo concebe outro povo, de como um humano concebe o direito à existência do outro? Aí eu sinto que estamos no meio território, não no céu. Eu sou rabino. Eu estudei filosofia e educação. E nós falamos de como uma pessoa se define através da definição e do reconhecimento de outras pessoas que não são ela. Mas isso é um processo intelectual, ético, espiritual, educativo, não político. É isso que você propõe? Qual é o caminho dessa mudança, então?
So, yes, you're absolutely right that in terms of what is needed to bring peace is nothing less than the transformation of Palestinian identity or the Palestinian ethos. From the beginning, the Palestinian identity and the Palestinian ethos was very much connected to the battle against the invading foreigners. This is who they are. They are the people who are fighting against the invading foreigners. Now they need a different identity, which says we will build our own state next to the Jewish people. That's a very different identity. That's a very different goal. Now, you're right that people do not change who they are easily. It's not something that will happen tomorrow morning. It's not that they will read my book and say, oh, yes, she's right. We recognize the right of the Jewish people to self-determination. The only way for the Palestinians to get to that point is if basically all the other options will be closed to them. And this is really what the book is intended to achieve. For many decades, the Arab world gave the Palestinians a blank check. Because if the conflict had really been an Israeli-Palestinian conflict, just between the Jews and Arabs of the land, that conflict was over in April 1948. In April 1948, the war between Jews and Arabs in the land was over. The battle lines were pretty much established. That would have been over. It became an Arab-Israeli conflict when 5 Arab armies invaded to continue the war, making it the Arab-Israeli conflict. Now, for decades, the Arab world gave the Palestinians a blank check to say no. The only reason the Palestinians could continue to say no for so many decades is that they had the Arab world and the Islamic world, and of course the Soviet and non-aligned world for a long time behind them. This is changing. We are now beginning to have parts of the Arab world which are saying to the Palestinians, enough. You are no longer going to have a blank check to keep saying no, no, and no. The problem is that we have countries in the West, countries that are funding UNRWA, the organization that essentially perpetuates for millions of Palestinians the idea that Israel will one day disappear and that they will have Palestine from the river to the sea. So for more than 70 years, Western countries like the United States, Europe, Australia are giving more than $1 billion to an organization that is telling the Palestinians generation after generation, keep believing, keep fighting, one day Israel will disappear and you will have Palestine from the river to the sea. This is crazy. And that's what the book is intended to achieve. The book is saying to the West, you are indulging the Palestinians in a dream that all of the land will one day be theirs. How can you ever expect the Palestinians to say yes to any peace agreement that is based on partition if you're constantly sustaining them in the belief that they will one day have all of it? So one of the examples we show in the book is with the German refugees after World War II. After World War II, there were 14 million German refugees. The war is already over. Germany signed an unconditional surrender. And yet, 14 million Germans are being pushed into carts. These were some very brutal scenes that we include in the book, and they're sent from Czechoslovakia and from Poland into the new borders of Germany. Now, they want their old houses back, of course. Every refugee wants. But does anyone indulge them? Does anyone have an organization for them for 70 years that says, yes, one day you will get your house in the Sudeten, one day you will get your house in Poland? No. We show in the book that throughout the 20th century, there were tens of millions of refugees in Europe, in Asia, in Africa. They are not sustained by organizations to keep dreaming of their old homes generation after generation. They built new lives wherever they were. Yes, it was tragic. War is tragic. But the message for tens of millions of refugees around the world was move on. Move on. The war is over. You're not getting your old house back. Build a new future. And as a result, we have peace in Europe. We have far fewer wars. But with Palestinians, for some reason, the world was willing to indulge them rather than give them the message that all refugees in the world got, which is the war is over, you lost your home, move on, build a new life wherever you are. They were indulged in the message that said, no, wait, one day the war will be undone and you will go back to the era before these foreign invaders were here. So how could you expect there to be peace when the West that claims to want peace, that claims to want a two-state solution, is constantly indulging the Palestinians in this dream of from the river to the sea? So our message is this: stop indulging them, send them the very difficult message that was given to all other refugees in the 20th and the 21st century, which is the war is over. That's it. The war is over and it's done. Wherever you are now is wherever you're going to build your future. You're citizens of Jordan. You will remain citizens of Jordan. You live in the West Bank and Gaza. You will continue to live there. And focus on building your future where you are, rather than hoping to take back another people's country. When this process will begin, it might still take another generation. For Germany, it took 24 years until Willy Brandt made peace with Poland and told the German refugees that they will never get this land back. So it took 24 years after they were told that the war is over. It might still take a generation, but we didn't even begin this process. And this is what the book hopes to achieve, to at least start this process of the transformation of the Palestinian identity away from trying to destroy Israel and towards trying to live next to Israel.
Para você ajudar também o nosso público a entender um pouco essa diferença. Algumas pessoas que nos veem talvez não conhecem a diferença entre as agências da ONU para refugiados. Nós sabemos que existem duas, a UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, aqui em português seria a sigla ACNUR, e a UNWRA, que é o United Nations Work Relief Agency, que seria a Agência de Refugiados para os Palestinos. Então, eu queria te trazer, alguns detalhes dentro da minha pergunta para também te trazer te pedir para você refletir junto com a gente aqui. Primeiro seria o status, né? Você tem um status diferente para refugiados da ACNUR, né, da UNHCR, para o mundo inteiro, um refugiado sírio, um refugiado de Bangladesh, um refugiado do Paquistão que vá, eventualmente agora do Afeganistão, que venha ao Brasil e receba a cidadania ou a residência permanente, não é mais refugiado de acordo com essa agência. E pela UNWRA, né, a UNRWA, a pessoa que foi para a França, ou foi para os Estados Unidos, ou foi para a Argentina, em 1948 e 49, ela obviamente recebeu aí a sua cidadania, mas continuou como refugiada, e o seu filho, que já nasceu no país novo, também é refugiado, e o seu neto também é refugiado. Ou seja, a gente tem uma situação absurda que uma pessoa que foi para os Estados Unidos, da região da Palestina, em 1949, e que casou e teve filhos, você tem uma pessoa hoje nos Estados Unidos que pode concorrer à presidência dos Estados Unidos porque nasceu nos Estados Unidos e ele também é considerado refugiado palestino. Ou seja, é um pouco contraditório. Agora, ao mesmo tempo, nós temos refugiados palestinos no Líbano que vivem em campos de refugiados com muros e com uma série de regras que parece mais um apartheid da África do Sul, refugiados na Síria e refugiados dentro de Gaza e da Cisjordânia, sendo que já é um território que eles controlam. Então, eu queria trazer para você esse embrolho, essa salada, que você talvez descrevesse um pouco essa diferença entre as duas organizações, por que o mundo não conseguiu impedir que uma organização, ou por que o mundo quis fazer uma organização só para os palestinos e como isso atrapalha eles, e ao mesmo tempo trazer um pouco a realidade dos refugiados que realmente vivem como refugiados no Líbano, na Síria e eventualmente até mesmo nos próprios territórios controlados pelos palestinos hoje em dia.
So I'll be happy to do it because really by comparing, like you did, the real refugees of the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees to the mostly non-refugees of UNRWA, we can understand the absurdity and why it's a main obstacle to peace. So generally, as a broad stroke, you can argue that the entire 20th century is basically about one political transition from empire to nation state. This transition involved 2 world wars, many bloody civil wars and other wars, but we begin the 20th century with much of the world divided between empires, and we end the 20th century when much of the world is divided between nation states. In the process of these wars, the establishment of new states, the creation of borders, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people became refugees. Before World War II, there was no special anything that dealt with it. You had Greeks and Turks who were pushed away very brutally in population exchanges and in many other situations. But after World War II, when there were refugees all across Europe, in Asia, in the subcontinent, between India and Pakistan, in East Asia, basically the United Nations newly created a treaty for refugees, defining what a refugee is, basically a person who is persecuted in their home country. They have to be a citizen of that country and be persecuted in their country, and then they run away and they're a refugee, meaning they get the protection of other countries, and as soon as they become a citizen of another country, they're no longer refugees. End of story. And the purpose of the UNHCR is really to bring an end to the unprotected status of refugees, find them protection, mostly through citizenship, and thereby they end their status as refugees. It's a very efficient agency. It has settled tens of millions of refugees in the last 70 years of its existence. UNRWA was created at about the same time to deal with the Arab refugees from the war between the Arabs and the Jews over the future of Israel and the Palestinian state. Initially, UNRWA was not a bad organization. It was trying to settle Most of the Arab refugees, we need to know, settled in the West Bank, in Gaza, and in Jordan. That's almost 80%. Jordan, which annexed the West Bank, actually gave them citizenship because Jordan really wanted to end the war with Israel, but then a Palestinian assassinated King Abdallah, and that kind of put an end to that. Egypt occupied the Gaza Strip, but that's it. Most of the refugees were actually in the West Bank, Gaza, and citizens of Jordan, including in the West Bank. Now, that meant they're not really refugees, but and the US and the UK gave a lot of money to UNRWA to help settle those refugees. But the refugees did not want to be settled. What we show in the book is that there's this mythology that the Palestinian refugees have been manipulated by bigger forces. But the truth is that they themselves refused to be resettled, because they knew that as soon as they would be resettled, the war is over. And we bring a lot of research and quotes in the book showing that Palestinians themselves in the 50s refused to be resettled because they refused to accept that the war was over. And they knew that if they would be resettled, the war was over. So basically, the US and the UK want to close down UNRWA. They realize that UNRWA is unable to resettle anyone. In the book, we bring, I think, a great example of another organization called UNCRA for Korea, for the refugees of Korea. UNCRA and UNRWA were meant to be temporary organizations, settle the refugees, and close down. UNCRA did that. UNCRA settled 2 million Korean refugees. The war is at the same time in the early 50s. That's 3 times the number of the Palestinians. They do it for much less than the money that is given to UNRWA. And look at where South Korea is today. It could have been the Palestinians. Imagine if South Korea still had camps on the border with the North. I mean, South Korea is a thriving, rich country because people moved on. So UNCRA closed down, achieved its goal. UNRWA didn't close down. Why? It didn't achieve its goal, and yet the Arab countries, which at this point were very important, they had oil, oil was important, they controlled waterways for oil. The Arab countries basically threatened America and the UK to say, you will not close down UNRWA. You made the mistake of supporting partition, the US, but you're not going to make the mistake of closing down UNRWA. UNRWA was clearly understood by the Arab world as a way of keeping the war open. So UNRWA remained open, and UNRWA and the Arab countries made sure that UNRWA was not part of the UNHCR. And they basically created a loophole where UNRWA is its own world. So it has its own definition for a refugee, which has nothing to do with persecution, has nothing to do with citizenship. It's just about people who lived for 2 years, just 2 years, in the area between the river and the sea and lost their homes. That's not the normal definition of a refugee. What UNRWA does and UNHCR does not do is it transfers the refugee, like you mentioned, generation after generation. It does never end the refugee status. So if someone left Jordan or Lebanon or Syria, Palestinian, and they became an American citizen or a Brazilian citizen, UNRWA still keeps them on their books as a refugee, which is insane. UNRWA never takes anyone off the books. UNHCR, as soon as someone gets citizenship, they're happy to take that person off their books. It means they were successful. UNRWA never takes anyone off their books, even if they have citizenship, even if they became millionaires, they're still a refugee on UNRWA books. And this is how we have today on UNRWA's books 5.5 million people who are registered as Palestinian refugees. The Palestinians claim 7 million because they even talk about children who live in Canada or Brazil, whom UNRWA doesn't count anymore. And just to understand how absurd it is, 2.2 million, 40% live in Jordan. They're citizens of Jordan. They were never displaced by war. They don't live in refugee camps. Many of them are middle class. Some of them are wealthy business people, and they're still listed as refugees. By any international or practical definition, they're not refugees. Another 40%, another 2.2 million live in the West Bank and Gaza. So even by their definition, they live in Palestine. Most of them are the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. They've never been displaced by war. Most of them don't even live in refugee camps. The camps by now have become neighborhoods. So you have a 30-year-old middle-class lawyer living in Ramallah who's listed as a refugee from Palestine, but he lives in Palestine. It's an insane absurdity. And then you have another million who are registered in Syria and Lebanon, but we know from recent data that most of them left. Most of them left Lebanon, most of them left Syria because of the conditions you mentioned. They became citizens of Germany, they work in Dubai. I'm sure some of them are Brazilian citizens. They're still on the books as if they're refugees. So the amazing thing is that the actual Palestinian refugee problem is very small. There are very, very few Palestinians who, by international standards, are refugees. Maybe 100,000, maybe 200,000. Those are small numbers that could easily be settled or resettled. That's not a big deal. But the refugee problem is a symbolic issue. It's actually not a practical issue. Practically, it's not an important issue. But symbolically, it's the most important issue. For Palestinians, the idea that they are refugees, even when they're citizens of Jordan or living in Ramallah, is the legitimacy that the world gives to the idea that one day Palestine from the river to the sea will be theirs. We saw this recently when, under President Trump, America took its funding away from UNRWA. America for years was the #1 funder for UNRWA. They took away the money. Now, did the Palestinians say, oh no, what are we going to do without the money? We cannot pay the teachers for the UNRWA schools, or no. What they said is the American president is trying to take away our right of return. The Palestinians perceive Western support for UNRWA not as humanitarian support, which is what the West mistakenly thinks. The Palestinians perceive Western support for UNRWA as political legitimacy for their dream of Palestine from the river to the sea. And that's what we highlight in the book.
Então, de algum modo, Einat, você sugere que se trata de uma guerra, talvez não somente do retorno, mas, se me permite, uma guerra do reconhecimento, uma guerra da legitimidade. Porque, afinal de contas, o que, se entendi bem, o que estão dizendo é os palestinos, assim como os judeus deveram abandonar suas casas que tinham na Cisjordânia durante a guerra e foram alocados dentro da parte que na divisão do lado judaico. Assim, os que ficaram do outro lado, ao invés de continuar se chamando a si próprios e vivendo em forma de refugiados, deveriam reconhecer que estão na sua casa, estão na sua pátria, estão desenvolvendo um Estado e se dedicar a isso. Aquele que nunca esteve lá, está sendo um empresário próspero no Canadá, que se chama empresário próspero no Canadá com parentes em Ramallah, assim como uma pessoa, um judeu próspero nos Estados Unidos tem parentes em Jerusalém e não por isso diz que ele é israelense. E então não é uma questão de retorno. As pessoas podem retornar lá, na sua casa, estão na sua pátria. Quem era de Ramallah e quiser retornar a Ramallah, retorna a Ramallah. Quem quiser continuar morando no Canadá, mora no Canadá, não se chama de refugiado. É basicamente isso, uma questão de reconhecimento. As pessoas se chamem a si próprias pelo que são e também chamem aos outros pelo que são. Eu queria entender isso porque isso me faz bastante, independentemente das ideologias políticas, né? Porque já não fica claro o que é esquerda e o que é direita. Mas se esse é o argumento, e entendo que no nosso público deve ter pessoas que possam concordar mais ou menos, e ser mais de esquerda, mais de direita, mais de um lado ou de outro, ser judeus ou não, e ser árabes ou palestinos, ou enfim. Mas, para mim, pessoalmente, me parece extremamente interessante essa questão, porque então não é uma questão de negar o direito ao retorno, é uma questão de dividir um espaço comum para que cada um possa retornar a seu espaço. E aceite que seu espaço não pode ser tudo, porque se for tudo, tem que acabar com o outro. E acabar com o outro significa matar, significa guerra. Também nós poderíamos ter dito, não, tudo isso é meu, e eu preciso retornar a tudo, então vou matar a todos os sírios e todos os libaneses e todos os... É uma loucura. Não tem um judeu na história que tenha dito uma coisa assim. Não é que depois se deu. Jamais na vida disse isso. E não vai dizer isso, mesmo que seja da extrema direita. Então, afinal de contas, talvez se trata de uma questão de reconhecer o outro e conviver com a ideia de que para que o outro exista, eu tenho que ceder. Afinal de contas, grandes pensadores falaram disso. Hobbes falou que temos que parar de pensar que o outro é um lobo nosso, o homem é o lobo do outro homem. Freud falou que as pessoas devem, para poder viver na civilização, precisam deixar de pensar que o outro é somente uma ameaça. E nós, em Sukkot, na festa de Sukkot, acreditamos que a Sukkot tem que ser uma Sukkot Shalom, um lugar onde todos possam conviver. Aliás, em Israel, eu morei em Israel durante 20 anos, em Israel fazíamos Sukkot justamente para conversar sobre estas coisas com os palestinos. E então seria interessante aproveitar a oportunidade de Sukkot para pensar nisso. Talvez uma das grandes contribuições de seu livro, e me corrija se estou errado, é que se trata de um reconhecimento do direito a existir do outro. Nós temos que reconhecer o direito a existir dos palestinos, os palestinos têm que reconhecer o direito a existir nosso. Para isso temos que dividir nossas casas e cada um ceder uma parte do seu território e aceitar que o outro vai trazer toda a sua família e seus descendentes a esse lugar. E não vamos ter tudo, nenhum dos dois, mas assim vamos ter paz. E talvez vamos ter muito mais do que se tivéssemos todo o território.
You are absolutely correct that the fundamental vision is one where Jews and our Palestinians each have their own political state in part of the land, understanding that they cannot have all of it. The problem is that you said, okay, the Jews need to recognize that the Palestinians have legitimate aspirations and rights to live in a state of their own. Israel has recognized it again and again and again, beginning, of course, in partition in 1947, when Israel said yes, and the Arab Palestinians said no, all the way to the last few years, 2000, 2008, when Israel said, go, have your own state, we'll remove the settlements, you can have a capital in East Jerusalem, we'll end the occupation, have a state. But the Palestinians walked away. Why did they walk away? Because for them, and you are right, this is the core issue. For them, the priority, the bigger priority is for the Jews not to have a state, rather than for themselves to have a state. In Camp David, in this 2000 proposal, the Palestinians were told, once you have your state, you can tell every Palestinian anywhere in the world to come live in your state. Just like Israel, as soon as it was established, could have its own immigration law that says any Jew can come live in Israel. So when Palestine is established, tell Palestinians anywhere in the world that they can come live here. This will be your right of return. But the Palestinians were like, that's not what we mean by the right of return. Because, as I said, 2.2 million live in the West Bank and Gaza. That's where the state of Palestine is supposed to be. And they still demand return for those people. So they're not interested in Palestinians from Syria coming to live in Ramallah. They want Israel. The right of return was never innocent. This is what we show in the book. It's not an innocent idea that says, oh, I just want my home back. It was from the beginning a political idea that basically said, we do not accept the outcome of the war. We do not accept that Israel was established, and we will spend our lives, generation after generation, trying to undo the war of 1948. That's what the idea of return is. So when you come to them and you say, you will have your own state in the West Bank and Gaza, you can let any Palestinian come live there, return to Palestine, they're saying, that's not what we mean, that's not what we want. And that's what we emphasize in the book. I even invented a word for it. I call it West-plaining, which is basically when Westerners explain what Palestinians have just said. Palestinians say, we want from the river to the sea. The right of return is inside Israel. And Westerners say, no, they just want a state in the West Bank and Gaza. No, we need to listen very carefully to what Palestinians say. They've been very consistent, very clear about what they want. And they are only going to change what they want if they have no other choice. As long as they are sustained by still some of the Arab world and the Western world in saying we want everything, they're not going to change their goals.
Um momento. Estamos com uma dificuldade com o som, me parece.
Eu queria te trazer para uma...
Minuto, André, me parece que estivemos com uma pequena...
Eu estou escutando...
Dificuldade com o som, me parece.
Não, pronto, já melhorou.
A última parte
estava
do Kainan
escutando a
falou
própria,
em inglês.
pronto, melhorou aqui. Renato, eu queria te trazer para um pensamento sobre isso que eu acho que alguns de nós aqui já refletimos no passado, eu também reflito isso nos nossos estudos aqui, que tem a ver com o vício na causa. Eu escutei, outro dia eu estava vendo uma série que chama The Man in the High Castle, no Amazon, que é como se os nazistas tivessem ganho a guerra e conquistam os Estados Unidos, e tem um grupo de pessoas que resistem, né? Os nazistas nos Estados Unidos, e aí tem discussões entre grupos rivais que querem lutar contra eles, e eles falam alguma coisa do tipo, a causa é mais importante que o objetivo. E eu fiquei refletindo sobre essa frase, eu falei, a causa passa a ser psicologicamente, você acha, mais importante do que atingir o objetivo da causa para algumas lideranças palestinas que, por sua vez, nasceram na causa e possuem cargos e salários e regalias por causa da causa, ou seja, tanto Arafat como os falecidos já Abu Jihad e outros, como agora Mahmoud Abbas, e tantos outros líderes que estão em volta deles, que cresceram no Fatah, que cresceram na OLP, tanto na parte de refugiados, quanto na parte da luta armada contra Israel, na época com a ajuda da União Soviética, mas eu acho que depois da queda da União Soviética, essa transformação que eles fizeram para depois fazer os acordos de Oslo, mesmo com todas as rejeições que eles tinham durante os acordos de Oslo, mas até os dias de hoje nós escutamos frases aqui e acolá, principalmente em árabe, quando eles dão entrevistas para os canais árabes deles mesmos, dizendo que Israel não tem direito de existir, ou de que jamais vão reconhecer o Estado judeu, ou de que jamais vão aceitar o direito de retorno para uma nova Palestina e abrir mão da volta do retorno para dentro de Israel. Ou seja, será que há uma questão psicológica no sentido de perpetuar a causa para que o objetivo da causa jamais se concretize, porque o objetivo que eles querem conquistar é impossível?
So let's start from the end. They don't think that their goal is impossible. I always tell people who say, oh, Palestinians know that their goal is impossible. They're not going to conquer Israel. The right of return is just a delusion. I tell them, look, open a map. That's what the Palestinians do. Open a map. What do the Palestinians see when they open a map? They see about 7 million Jews, give or take, living among 500 million Arabs, surrounded 1.5 billion Muslims. They can very reasonably and rationally believe that with enough patience, 1 generation, 50 years, 100 years, this will all be theirs. So let's begin by the fact that they don't think that their goal is impossible. It might take time, but they don't think it's impossible. It's very important to understand that. They're not delusional, they're not irrational. They actually think that the irrational side in the conflict is us, 7 million Jews who think they can survive in a 500 million Arab world or 1.5 billion Muslim world. So they're not being irrational. They think their goal is achievable. Now, in terms of the people and the leadership, sadly, is actually more moderate than the people. We want to believe in a mythology where the people just want peace, and the leadership is so corrupt that they're keeping the issue going. Actually, it's been the opposite. The leadership generally has been willing to be a little more moderate, but they can't really split with their people. And the Palestinian people are very much committed to the idea of return. And it's not an abstract idea. In recent years, we've had a lot of demonstrations and violent activity next to the Gazan border with Israel. You know, they never march on the Gazan border with Egypt, right? They always march on the Gazan border with Israel. All these marches are for one thing. What are they called? They're called the marches of return. They say that they want to use Gaza not in order to make Gaza into the Singapore of the Middle East or to make Gaza into a prosperous Dubai on the Mediterranean. They say they want to use Gaza in order to take back, in their mind, to take back Palestine from the river to the sea. The Palestinians say it very clearly, and then the rest of the world says, oh, they're doing that because of the blockade, or they're doing that because conditions in Gaza are very difficult. No, it's an attitude that doesn't treat the Palestinians seriously. Listen to them, take them seriously. They know what they're fighting for. They're willing to fight for it for another 100 years. The only way they're going to stop fighting for it is if they will lose the support of the Arab world, which is beginning to happen. So that makes me hopeful. If they lose the support of the Arab world, and they lose the support of the Western world, not support for having a state. I want them to have Arab and Western support to have a state next to Israel. But as long as they believe that they have Arab and Western support to keep fighting to destroy Israel, they will continue to dedicate their life to this idea. They will only stop when they no longer have Arab support for saying no, and they will no longer have Western support for saying no. Only then will they begin the very difficult process of coming to terms with Israel, understanding that without Arab support and without Western support, they cannot defeat Israel. That's true. And then they will finally begin to change and have more other ideas about what they want to do. But right now, they think that the idea from the river to the sea is a very rational, reasonable, and achievable goal.
Ok. Talvez estamos chegando ao nosso finalzinho.
We are getting to the end of our talk.
Cuidado com o canal, porque estamos ouvindo a tradução que estão passando para ela. Vamos continuar no português. Então, Einat e todo o público, André também, estamos nos aproximando do final, nós fomos, de algum modo, intercalando algumas das perguntas e das observações das pessoas, são muitos os comentários de um lado, do outro lado, e assim é como deve ser um debate, é uma conversa, tem opiniões diversas, e Sukkot é um momento maravilhoso para isso. Nós somos a favor de ideias diferentes, valores diferentes, pessoas que mudam de ideias também. A Einat veio da esquerda, a Einat trabalhou com Shimon Peres, está trazendo argumentos muito diferentes da esquerda clássica hoje em dia, baseados não em política, e sim em estudos, e essas são opiniões legítimas para escutá-las também. Importante também ouvir que se trata de, não de uma negação do retorno. Algumas pessoas estão perguntando aqui, mas Einat, como é possível? Então, está dizendo, voltem, claro que sim. Direito legítimo dos palestinos a voltar ao que eles acreditam que é sua terra. Não a toda, porque se for toda, tem que me matar a mim. E eu não vou renunciar à minha vida. Mas diga você, entendo que é isso que você está dizendo. Alguns perguntam exatamente isso. Eles não têm direito ao que nós temos direito. Então, isso seria interessante responder.
So one of the things that Palestinians really like to play on is this idea of like, the Jews got to return, why don't we? And in doing so, they completely mask the very different goal. Zionism, as the liberation movement of the Jewish people, wanted the Jewish people to have a state. To have a state where, in the one land, the one piece of land, to which they had a connection. Zionism was always focused on a very clear goal, a state for the Jewish people, which is why they made it very clear that they are willing to divide and share, because the idea of having a state for the Jewish people could be achieved in part of the land. So the land was partitioned with the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, and then in partition. And the Zionist movement always said yes, yes, and yes, because the goal was to have a state. The goal of the Zionist movement was never return. Jews could always travel and come and be buried and die in the land of Israel. The goal of Zionism was for the Jewish people to govern themselves in their land. It doesn't have to be all of it. The Palestinian idea of return was created after the War of 1948, and it's very important to emphasize, if the Palestinians said yes to partition in 1947, no one would have been moved. All they had to do was say yes. But because they waged war against the establishment of a Jewish state in any borders, the outcome of that war is that many of them became refugees, as happened in many wars. They're not special. What is different is, unlike all other refugees in the world, the Palestinians refused to accept the outcome of the war. And they created this idea of return, not as an innocent idea, but as a way to undo the war, and especially, of course, to undo the establishment of the state of Israel. So for Jews, the idea of coming to live in the land of Israel was part of the greater idea of establishing a state and self-governing. For the Palestinians, what they call return is part of their idea of undoing the Jewish state. Those are very different goals. One of the things we quote in the book, and I think it's a very powerful quote, is that the British foreign minister in 1947, Ernest Bevin, if you know anything about him, he didn't like Jews, he didn't like Zionism, but he understood the conflict. He goes to the British Parliament to explain why Britain is leaving, and he says that there is an irreconcilable conflict. He calls it irreconcilable. Why? He says there's two peoples in the land, there's Jews, there's Arabs. He says what the Jews want is a state. What the Arabs want for the Jews not to have a state. Listen to those two goals. The Jews want a state. The Arabs want the Jews not to have a state. Those are irreconcilable goals by definition. And this is what the two sides have been doing ever since. This is why the Jews said yes to partition. Because partition, even though they were not happy about it, partition was without Judea, the cradle of Jewish civilizations. Partition was without Zion, without Jerusalem, and they still said yes because it served their goal of having a state. The Arabs said no to having a state and to partition because it did not serve their goal of preventing the establishment of a Jewish state. So the idea of Palestinian return is merely the new phase of saying no to the Jewish state. That's all it is. It's not an innocent idea. Now, it was mentioned that the fall of the Soviet Union changed things. Until the fall of the Soviet Union, the Palestinians, because of the backing they had from the Soviet Union, from the non-aligned movement, from the Arab world, were very clear that their goal was the destruction of Israel. They made it very clear. Beginning at the late 80s, when they no longer had the support of the Soviet Union and they wanted the support of the West, they changed their language. They started speaking about self-determination in two states, but they never, ever, never gave up on the idea that 7 million Palestinians have what they consider a sacred right to settle inside Israel. So most Westerners don't understand that when Palestinians say we support two states, but the right of return is sacred, they're not supporting two states. They're supporting the same idea they had since 100 years ago, that the Jewish people should not govern themselves in any part of the land to which they have a connection. So again, the Jews, the idea of the return of the Jews was only to establish a state in part of the land. The goal was a state. The idea of Palestinian return was established and created in order to destroy the state of the Jews. They're very, very, very different goals.
Perfect.
Estamos a já 1h20 e em Israel já passa da meia-noite. Não sei se você está em Israel, nos Estados Unidos agora, mas se você estiver nos Estados Unidos ainda um pouco mais cedo, mas em Israel já passa da meia-noite. E eu queria fazer um comentário e ao mesmo tempo trazer os agradecimentos finais aqui, tanto a CIP, quanto ao Rabino Reuven, quanto a você, quanto ao Adi, quanto à editora Contexto e à equipe de Stand With Us, ao Mário. Então, eu queria só que você talvez trouxesse assim uma ideia final, né, da importância do livro, porque eu acho que o livro ele realmente ele traz ele escancara uma verdade que algumas pessoas não querem aceitar. Elas não querem aceitar, muitas delas, porque elas estão presas dentro de realidades paralelas que acabam ajudando a nutrir as suas próprias narrativas. Por exemplo, o movimento racista BDS coloca a resolução 194 como sendo uma das exigências que eles têm para o boicote, sendo que a resolução 194, como você mesmo coloca no livro, é descontextualizada por eles e por outros, como um suposto direito do retorno que a ONU não dá para eles, sendo que vários outros parágrafos da própria resolução falam a respeito de estabelecimento de acordos e de paz, e até mesmo os árabes, na época, rejeitam a própria resolução. Então, eu queria... Esses dados, que são fáceis de serem achados, eventualmente, são completamente ignorados por pessoas, inclusive professores acadêmicos das melhores universidades do mundo. no Brasil, nos Estados Unidos, na Inglaterra, que insistem em repetir mentiras, fake news, para entrar, para encaixar dentro de uma narrativa específica, colocar Israel de uma forma extremamente opressora e ruim e os palestinos como eternas vítimas. Eu acho que isso é muito interessante, talvez, a reflexão que o livro traz. Então, mais uma vez, queria te deixar aqui aberta ao final remarks. Eu queria, antes de você fazer seus final remarks, deixar o Rabino fazer o final remarks dele também. Agradecer aqui novamente a presença de todos. Muito obrigado e esperamos em breve trazê-la você aqui ao Brasil para uma roda de conversas com jornalistas, autoridades e estudantes.
Então, talvez vamos ouvir que seu final remarks, André, foi uma última pergunta para Einat. Vamos ouvir a Einat e depois nos despedimos todos juntos. Por favor, Einat, vai primeiro, Einat. Talvez, já que está dizendo também uma pincelada mais do livro, talvez colocar aí a questão de que é um fato que, por razões justificáveis, mais ou menos, ou de direita ou de esquerda, de novo, independentemente das ideologias, é claro que uma grande parte da população palestina, mesmo concordando ou não concordando com sua própria dirigência, de um tipo e de outro, é fato que muitos deles estão vivendo em vários dos lugares, em situações com muito poucos direitos e com muito pouca dignidade. Isso também é um fato. E também isso deveríamos encontrar, obviamente, não somente nós, mas também sobre isso devemos falar e prestar atenção, porque são seres humanos como nós, que acabam sendo, eu não me refiro obviamente a um advogado próspero no Canadá, mas sim a uma pessoa sem condições, que o dinheiro do mundo e do Ocidente não chega a eles, e eles muitas vezes não têm nem estrutura física, financeira, sanitária, água, enfim, em muitos dos lugares, né? Isso também é um fato. Por favor, Einat primeiro e depois vamos nos despedir. Sobre isso, devemos falar e prestar atenção, porque são seres humanos como nós.
So I'll be very clear. There are many poor people around the world. There are many people living in difficult conditions. I am very much in favor of the world helping poor Palestinians, poor people, but we need to separate that from the political question. You can help people, you can give money, but what we're highlighting is that it's not about humanitarian conditions. I know that it makes us feel good to think that this is only a humanitarian issue, but talk to the Palestinians themselves. They will be very clear that what they're fighting for, even in the price of misery and poverty, is they believe they're fighting for a noble and dignified goal. We might think that it's not dignified, but they believe, truly believe, that the goal of destroying Israel and pushing Israel out is a dignified and noble goal, and they're willing to sacrifice their lives for it. One of the biggest mistakes made by the West is thinking that you can bribe people out of their convictions. If they believe that it's better for them to use cement in Gaza, to build tunnels, to fight and to take back what they believe is their land, then they will use cement to build tunnels. They will not use cement to build a home. This is their worldview. And we need to understand that until that worldview changes, this is going to be the priorities of their society. They're going to divert all their resources to fighting Israel rather than building their own future. So they must change their goals. And once they change their goals, which is going to be a difficult process, which, as I said, will not happen as long as they think they have legitimacy for their current goal. Once they change their goals, they will be able to divert all their resources to building a state, which will be prosperous. They will find that everyone wants to help them. If you look at it, at the end of the day, the world has been sympathetic to Palestinians for decades, but they have not been able to use the sympathy, including that of BDS, to achieve anything, because what they've been trying to achieve is for there to be no Israel. The day they will change their goal to building a Palestinian state next to Israel, rather than instead of it, all the money, all the support, all the sympathy they have will manifest itself in creating a good country. As long as their priority is no Israel, that's what they're going to use their resources for.
Ok. Eu também, então, só me resta agradecer a Einat por ter tido a disposição a nos apresentar diretamente, de primeira mão, as motivações e várias partes do livro. A parceria do Stand With Us e da editora, agradecer as tradutoras, agradecer as tradutoras em Libras e as tradutoras em inglês e em português, e dizer uma e outra vez que nós estamos interessados em ter Sukkot. A Sukkah é um lugar onde se encontram os diferentes. As 4 espécies representam a diversidade que deve conviver. Conviver, exatamente isso, aceitar que um tem uma cor, e outro tem uma forma, e o terceiro tem um sabor determinado, o quarto dá uma sombra, o quinto, e assim por diante. São 4, mas com muitas diferenças, com muitas forças e com muitas fraquezas. E é justamente no convívio, na troca de ideias, na troca de valores, que vamos conseguir conviver todos nessa grande aldeia que é o mundo, nesse espaço limitado que é o Oriente Médio, e mais limitado ainda que é a terra de Israel. E para isso, o primeiro que precisamos todos é reconhecer que existe um outro, e que esse outro tem também direito a viver e existir e ser ele. E ele tem que me reconhecer que também eu tenho direito a existir e a ser eu. E isto, de algum modo, é o que estamos falando entre todos. Vamos ter muitas ideias e muitas formas de ler e de discutir, e para isso é que a academia, aos poucos, vai se lançar. Muitíssimo obrigado a todas e todos por terem estado conosco aqui. Vamos ampliar nossas discussões, vamos estudar filosofia, história, política, artes, e vamos engrandecer nosso espírito e nossa possibilidade de conviver num lugar melhor. Chag Sameach para todas e todos. Muito obrigado. Mais uma vez, ótima noite.
Obrigado, Einat. Toda Rabá. Obrigado, Rav. Obrigado a todos pela presença.
Obrigado.
Boa noite.
Obrigado, Toda Rabá.